So, Natisha, it looks like we do not have anyone that is waiting in the wings to join us from the public.
Nope, it's just us.
Okay, then I believe I will forego the meeting participation instructions and proceed right on to our meeting, and I will turn it over to Linda.
This special meeting of the Historic Resources Commission is now called to order at 9:13.
10:13.
10:13.
We haven't adjusted our clock apparently.
Oh, and Annie, if you do the roll call.
Certainly, Chair Phyllis,
Here.
Commissioner Orlando,
Here.
Commissioner Perlman,
Here.
Commissioner Swift,
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here. So agenda item number 2, new business, is we have a training session by Joe Michalak. Thank you so much for being here. And the topic is on how to research the history of your Santa Cruz house.
Okay.
And
Okay, Joe, go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, everyone, I'm ready to take off.
Yep, you should be able to share your screen right now.
Let's. Everyone see that?
Nope. It looks like try clicking the share screen again. And
Yeah, it wants me to close the share tray. So, yeah, okay, it allows it.
There we go.
It needed permissions. Okay. Okay, you can
Perfect.
see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I know you can't see my mug. This was working Friday, but whatever. Nonetheless, I think you can imagine somebody who looks like Tom Cruise, but without hair. Anyway, so today I just wanted to give you some clues as to why I'm doing this. Many of us look at historic structures and properties, and obviously the visual is the most important thing because, you know, you see it. What you don't see is who owned it, who designed it, who built it, that kind of thing. So that oftentimes is the most difficult aspect of discerning the history of a house. And I wanted to go back just briefly and talk about what is a historic resource. And we all know it's a building, structure, object, site, landscape, or historic district. And we don't often think of them, but burial grounds, amusement parks, carousel, the Loop Carousel and the boardwalk is a historic resource. The cannery in Santa Cruz, the Felton Bridge, certain neighborhoods. You have the Six Sisters Lawnway Historic District in Capitola. You've got the Venetian Court. You've got the Brookdale Clubhouse, the Vicente Castro House in Aptos, off of Rio Del Mar Boulevard, or Soquel Drive, rather. St. Vincent de Paul Church in Davenport, Burrell House in Scotts Valley. Private residences, the Bacchius House in Watsonville, Mansion House, etc. So it covers a whole range and gamut of not only structures, but what we call cultural landscapes. So what you really want to know is how are these resources designated and evaluated? And there are standards that developed back in the 60s when people were alarmed at the rapacious movement to what people considered historic structures, to destroy them, remove them. So the federal government decided to get together and develop some standards for evaluating historic properties. So in California, this is administered jointly by the Office of Historic Preservation in Sacramento and the feds in Washington, D.C. And to belong to this program, which is called the Certified local government program. They're called CLGs. And in California, there are 69 of them. We're surrounded by them here in Northern California. You've got Monterey, Carmel, Santa Clara, Los Gatos, San Jose, Palo Alto, San Francisco, which obviously has an enormous investment in preserving historic structures. You've got Salinas, San Juan Bautista, on and on. So there are a considerable number of them surrounding the area. So in terms of criteria, there are 3 levels. There's a national register. When you go through the evaluation process and decide that the property is significant enough, they'll put it on the national register. We also have a state of California register, and you have your local register. So with the national register, I'm putting up some of the key criteria. And of course, it's very general, but most of it relates to architecture. You've got a couple of points here about people associated with the lives of persons significant in our past, and a structure or cultural landscape that's the work of a master. These are individuals involved in this. With the California Register, pretty much the same thing, a little bit expanded, associated with the lives of persons important to local California national history, and it repeats the federal criteria, work of a master. And on the local level, that really depends on your jurisdiction. And this varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. This happens to be the one for the city of Santa Cruz, what I'm most familiar with. So we have lives of persons who made a meaningful contribution to national, state, or local history. And that's deliberately vague because it depends on how you evaluate it, what you consider. There are some very general criteria, but you have to decide this based on your own knowledge and experience. And then you have the work, number 6, the work of one or more masters, builders, designers, artists, or architects. So those are the human elements. So what I've done here on this screen is to summarize the criteria related to evaluation of people. So you get the idea that these are the things that are invisible. Obviously, the structure you can see whether it has vinyl windows, whether they've destroyed the historic character. But with the individuals involved in either creating it or people who live there that are significant in our local jurisdiction, that's not obvious. So you have to dig for that. The other element in consideration of historic structures is integrity. How do you retain integrity? How do you measure it? How do you evaluate it? And with integrity, there are 7 aspects of integrity, all of which, except for number 7, associated with the property itself. You consider the location, the design of it, what is the setting? Is it still historic? The materials used in the creation of the structure, the workmanship, and the feeling. Now, these are very general, and you can go out over the internet. You can go to the Secretary of Interior Standards. You can look at various cities and counties that have created their own interpretation that helps you kind of gather what these vague notions really mean, practically speaking. The last one is association with the direct link between an important historic event or person and a historic property. So once again, I'm talking about what is visible. Assessing integrity can be done by evaluating the physical features of a property, looking at the character defining features, examining what is visible. What isn't visible is who owned or lived in the structure and who designed or built the structure. So now we're going to embark on what I call a voyage of discovery. So this means establishing the paper trail. And what I mean by voyage of discovery, we're not talking about the Titanic or Shackleton's voyage to the poles or the Lusitania. Hopefully this will be something that will discover useful information for people. Let me just add as an aside, while I'm giving this presentation, I know you can't see me, But just shout out if you want to ask a question or ask for some interpretation, because I think it's important to address those issues at the point in which you're looking at it. So in order to establish, so just chime in whenever you feel like it, if something isn't clear, you have a question. So I've done, my wife and I, Judy Steen, have done probably 50 house histories over the years. And it can be a painful process, but it is vastly improved in the last 4 or 5 years with the application of computer technology and the internet. So my go-to source when I'm looking to find out who owned a property, tell me about the property, let's look at the maps, let's look at the adjacent area, I go to the county GIS. And this application is, I think, is the only way I could do it. Otherwise, I'd be spending hours in the library or in the courthouse going over volumes and books. This is a game changer as far as I'm concerned. So what we want to do is establish a property record, because if you don't know who owned it, who lived in it, all you can look at is the architecture. So where do you get started? You start with the County Geographic Information Services in Santa Cruz at the county, and you access this by Googling GIS County of Santa Cruz, and it'll take you there. So what can you find out by examining the GIS? First of all, you want to discover all you can about the property. So you start with searching either by address, or if you happen to have the APN, you can search by that. And you can get and I'll talk about getting the APN from the assessor's office. That would be the next step. So at the top left of the screen, you can see you can put in your APN record, and it'll come up with a boundary line around the property that represents that APN. And in the lower part of the screen, you can click on the APN, or you can click on the assessor's office records, and you can go there and it'll tell you more information. So when you go to the assessor's office, and if I'm going too fast, just tell me to slow down, because there's probably, some of you have probably already done this, so this is not that unfamiliar to you, but this is the methodology that I use. So when you go to the assessor's office, there's a vast array of information that you can discover. First of all, you can look at the property taxes, and you can find out if your neighbor is paying $500 a year and you're paying $15,000. But that's another story. Parcel addresses, it tells you where the bill goes for the property. And you can determine from that whether the person lives here or it's somebody from out of town who owns it. You can look up splits and combos, and you can look up property transfers. That's most important. And the characteristics of the property. Those two are really key to researching a property. The example I use here, excuse me, is a house on Broadway in Santa Cruz. So what can we learn from the records? So at the top left of the screen is a record of property transfers. You can see the book and page. I call it book and page because that's what it's called in the recorder's office. That represents the document. And it goes back to the 19th century, where they had scribes who would write the actual deeds in the property books. So it's called book and page. You'll need that information. And I suggest, if you don't do research, you either print this out and take it with you, or you write it down. In some instances, it will tell you what the property cost, what someone paid for it. It also tells you whether it's been reappraised or not. And I think you can assume, if it's not been reappraised, that it was just a transfer among relatives, that kind of thing. So you don't see it reassessed. Okay.
Joe,
Yeah,
this is Linda.
Yeah.
I have a question.
sure.
I have a property that I'm hoping to research, and I've gotten as far as what you are showing right now.
Okay.
And so looking at that page that shows all the reappraisals and so on,
Yeah.
So, well, first of all, this is a farmhouse built in 1860, 1860. And it's out on Branson 40 Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of that page that talks about no reappraisals and reappraisal, the very bottom entry is CONV, conversion, conventional, CONV colon 134126. And the transfer date is 7/4/1776. Now, is there a typo, and what does that CONV mean?
Just to interrupt you for a second. I've seen that in various properties I've researched, and I've never really examined it carefully because it has never affected the research that I do. I think that is some nomenclature that is used by the assessor or the recorder. And I've never really investigated it, and I've ignored it because, I don't want to waste my time. And maybe it has some significance. But you bring up a point about what do you do about a property that's that old, 1880s and so forth. I suggest, this is a little diversion here. What I suggest is you go get the property description. And then that would be a start. You can start with the individuals that are identified there and start your research that way. But getting back to, I'm sorry, I can't directly answer that. But the other aspect of what you can find in the assessor's record is under characteristics. This is a real treasure trove of information. It gives you the year built. Now, my comment about the year built is, yeah, fairly often that's correct. But many times those records aren't accurate. And it could be any number of reasons why they're not. But you take that and say, okay, I believe it, but I'll have to confirm that and verify it. The other thing it tells you is the parcel size, the number of rooms, how big the property is overall in terms of acreage and so forth. That's very useful information that you can take a note of. So with the property you're talking about, 1880s, you can check that and say, does this conform to what you know already? Maybe you've already seen that. So once again, why is the transfer document important? Identifies the original, the current deed of trust holder. And this is a little blow up of what I was talking about on the previous screen. Excuse me. So what you do with that depends on how old it is, what the date of the transaction is, and where you can find the actual deed. The real old ones are on microfilm. I'll get into that in the next slide or two, on workstations that are in the recorder's office. Unfortunately, you cannot look at deeds remotely. They are not available online. You have to go to the office of the recorder to get a copy of it, photograph it from the screen, or print it out for a small fee. And let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so other aspects that are important are the maps that are available at the GIS. And the reason I bring this up now is that you want to know, is this exactly the right property I'm talking about? And what's the historic development of the property? What can maps tell me about when it was developed, when it was subdivided, is the historic nature of it? And there are two types of maps. There are those that are recorded, and those are non-recorded. The recorded ones obviously have more validity because they've been authenticated. And the recorder's office has decided that they are authentic and validated. So you can click on these links. This is detail that you can explore later. I'm not going to go into click on this link and click on that link. You can see it on the screen. Click on the link to view the map, and a map will come up. And you can copy these maps and download them. They're very useful. This helps develop what we call a chain of title, or the paper trail. And this particular property at 1408 Broadway in Santa Cruz, this is lot 6 of Effie and Crohn's subdivision. And if I can read on the screen, what is it, 1886. So that tells you when that property was laid out, when that parcel was developed. What you can also find on the assessor's record, and this is the most current information, this is what exists today. This is the APN map. And you can see this is the whole neighborhood around that 1408 Broadway. And two things it tells you the size of the property today as it exists, the parcel number. And that's very useful because you can compare that size of the property with the historic record. Very often people subdivide their property or they sell off 20 feet to somebody else. So that's important to note because you want to make sure you're really looking at the right deed. So what have we discovered when we go through this process of 1408 Broadway? We've discovered the size of the property, which is important, the dimensions currently, the year it was built, 1898, according to the records in the assessor, property transfer date, excuse me, property transfer date back to 1959. I don't expect you were noting all of this, but this is what's there. And the recorded maps that show the property was part of the Effie and Crown subdivision in 1886. So what do you do next? So you've noted the transfer date information. You've got information about when it was built. What you need is the property description. You don't really know what it says. And that's important. You have to have an accurate description. So how do you find that? Well, you go to the recorder's office, and what you're looking on the screen here are the indexes. At the left-hand side of the screen are those bond volumes that are indexes to the grantor grantee deeds. Now, the grantor is the person selling the property, and the grantee is the person buying the property. And those are from 1850 to 1977 in bond volumes. In 78, they transitioned to an electronic system, and there are workstations, and you can see them on those tables a little bit. Those workstations cover documents from 78 to date. And on those workstations, you can actually get the deed on the screen. And when you can't, you can then take the transfer data from that, things that are before 1977, and and this is a little complicated. You go to the other workstations in this little alcove in the recorder's office, and they have it's really an improved system. It used to be really kind of kludgy, and they've really spent some time and money to improve on it. That will take you to the deeds of trust from 1850 to 1977. So you can what I do is I photograph that because I don't want to pay $2 every time I get a deed of trust. And you can get 10 or 20 of these for any property you're researching if you want to compare the actual deed description from year to year. So I just photograph it with my smartphone, and it's not the greatest resolution, but you get the content, basic content of it. So with current deeds, 78 to date, they're searchable on those workstations by APN or the name of the grantor or grantee. Historic deeds, 1850 to 1977, manual searching of bond volumes, and those bond volumes are formidable. They're heavy. You can look at them and see that there's a little rectangle of dust in the center where no hand has ever touched. So I would say cancel your subscription to your health club because you don't need it if you're going to be lifting these books, and bring a Swiffer with you to clean that dust off. Any rate, but the books are really the key. That's how I approach it. There's also, you can use the workstations to do similar research, but I prefer going through the bound volumes. Okay, so this is the actual workstation from 78 to date. This is what it looks like. And you can see, you can search by the party name, either the buyer or the seller, grantor or grantee, and you can search by APN. And then comes up, here's a record that shows you the actual transaction for that individual property. And you can see where that arrow is pointing is the book and page. And you can take that information and then what year is this? This is 1980. Okay. You can find it right on the screen here. You don't have to go to the other workstations. But if it's before 1978, you're going to have to go to the other workstations, key in that book and page, and call up the microfilm version of it. So you've got two basic systems encompassing everything in the county in terms of deeds. The current ones, 78 to date, the historic ones, 1850 to 1977. So here's an example of a deed 78 to date that I found on that screen, that previous screen. I called it up and looked at it. Here's the legal description. You can either print it out through the auspices of the people in the recorder's office. And I might add that they're very helpful, but they're not attorneys and they are obligated not to give you legal advice. And I understand that. So they can help you navigating the workstations and looking at information, but they're not there to give you legal advice. So this is a copy of a deed that I just photographed and put on the screen here. So historic, this is the workstation now, the microfilm workstation. It's called Digital Reel. There's a help button and you can click on it and you will see nothing because they haven't developed the help for it yet. So don't expect to see that. Here's digital access, and it gives you the various categories of data, deeds 1850 to 1922, and so on and so forth. So on the right-hand side, under search, you put in the book and page. And then you click on that and will take you to the document. Another way to approach this, if you have a name, for example, if you know somebody's a property owner, in this case, it's one of the people that I discovered searching 1408 Broadway, someone named Areva Taylor. Well, you can key in the name, put it in quotes, and you get abbreviated results. And this is handy because you don't have to go through all the books. But what I discovered is nothing's perfect. You will find things missing here. So I always use the books as a backup. And you can click on the link and it'll take you to the document. So this is real handy. Now, the downside of this is when you're talking about somebody who owns a lot of property, you could spend hours going through all these records and you get fatigued after a while because, it's too tedious looking at this screen for hours on end. Anyway, that's another way to do it. So here's the input, or rather the output from the workstations where the microfilm is. Example of a copy of that deed from 1978. That's the current owner. That's their current deed. And if, I won't go into that, but you take it back, you can see how property may have changed. So that's why you need, for everybody who owned this property, you need to compare that deed to make sure that's exactly correct. So this, now getting back to the bound volumes, this is the index to the deeds. These are not the deeds here. This is the Grantor Grantee indexes. And you can see these musty old volumes, but they're very helpful because I don't think I've ever found an error in these deed books. You find things corrected, but I've never really found an error. It's pretty remarkable that this is relatively error-free. So in the historic years up till from 1850 to 1922, the volumes are split. Grantor on the left side, on the right side is the Grantee. And after that, they've subdivided the books into a separate Grantee run and a separate Grantor run. And we're going to have a quiz later. No. Okay, so note the book and page. It's on the far right. You'll need that in order to go back to the microfilm to look up to get the deed of trust. So that's why they pay title researchers big bucks to do this, because it is frustrating. And I have to make a call out to one of my mentors, Steve Benson. And some of you may know Steve Benson, who worked in the title business for 20 years, and I think he's done consulting work for the county. But whenever I run into a bind of something I can't find, I always call on Steve Benson. He's retired, and you can't always expect him to respond, but he's very helpful when you get into a bind. So he knows everything there is to know about deeds in Santa Cruz County. Now, there's another, not to belabor this, but there's another way you can look at historic deeds. Sometimes you will find that the microfilm copies of the deeds are really not very readable. And maybe because the originals were poor quality, so it's garbage in and garbage out. But for a certain period of time from 1850 through, I forget what the cutoff date is, every few years they create these bound volumes of the actual deeds. And you can see an example here. You can always go back to these bound volumes, which have records of the actual deed. And you can see this one here. This is pretty readable. You can make a photo of it, and you can compare that to the other deeds that you have. So there's always a backup. And they keep adding to these bound volumes. And I don't remember when the last time they added it was a couple of years ago. But they'll keep building and adding more and more. So there's always a backup. If you can't read the microfilm, you can always go to the bound volumes of the actual deeds. And sometimes I just prefer to do that because it's easier than messing with the microfilm. Okay, so let's talk again about maps. The value of maps is key to researching any property in Santa Cruz. And there are a couple of types of maps. There's Sanborn Maps, which I'll talk about shortly, but there are also maps which are called cadastral, which have landowners' names on them. So for Santa Cruz County, there are major landowner maps. The key one on this list is there's the Foreman and Wright from 1866. That's when City of Santa Cruz was established. That shows landowners within the parameters of the city property at the time. There's also the 1889 Hatch map, and we'll talk about that a little later. That shows landowners in City of Santa Cruz. And I'll talk about access to Ucsc maps. This isn't correct right now because Ucsc has taken them down. They're evaluating and reprogramming their map program, so it's not available. They do have Sanborns, but you have to go up there and use them on a workstation. So I'll get into that later. Then there's the Baldwin map for the city of Santa Cruz in 1923. That's available in special collections at Ucsc. You can make an appointment to go see it. And then there are the Standards atlases, 1933, 1944, and 1947, that cover the county and the city of Santa Cruz. They show landowners at the parcel level. Now, the other and probably the most important map that you should be concerned with in your researching your property is the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps. These started back in in Santa Cruz, I think that I have a list of them that go back to the 1880s. And there's an 1888 map of Aptos that I'll show you later. But what these were designed to do was insurance companies wanted to know, what is the nature of the property that I'm insuring? What is my risk? What's the building material? How big is it? What kind of construction and so forth. Things that you need to know in terms of evaluating risk. So here's a Sanborn map. And one of the things you'll note on some of these Sanborns is they have both the old numbers and the new street numbers. And it can be kind of confusing. The latest number, and I forget what year this is, probably 1905, 1917, update to 1905. The number that's right up against the property line is the current number, and the previous number is above that. Why I mention that is that later on, when you're researching properties in city directories or local newspapers, they'll make reference often to a street number. Well, street numbers change. I mean, they change quite often, and it's quite confusing. So that's why you need to make a note of these, because you could be talking about the same property, but it's got a different number. In 1950, in the city of Santa Cruz, in some of the areas, all the street numbers changed. Our house here at 114 Escalona used to be 14. That's fairly easy transition to figure out, but many of them are quite different. And you'll notice on some of these maps that they'll have the odd and even numbers on the same side of the street, which really drives you crazy. But anyway, so here's on the right-hand side of the screen is a shot of Sanborn for the city of Santa Cruz, and it covers Del Mar and little parts of Live Oak off to the right, lower hand right. And there's a key map that goes with it, and I'll show you what that is. Here's a key to the 1917 update to 1905. So this is what I was talking about in terms of type of building, kind of building material it is. Is it frame? Is it brick? Is it adobe? Does it have fire exits? What can a fire department expect to discover when it goes to a fire at a property? So it's part of preparing them for what they're going to run into. Very useful. Here's the 1888 Aptos that I found. Now this I got off the computers at UCSC. It's a screenshot. You can email these maps to yourself so you can get a better copy of it. They're really high resolution. They're really very good maps. And many of these, of course, are available at the Library of Congress. So you don't have to go up to UCSC and find a parking place and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what you note on this map is they do have errors from time to time. 1888 Aptos, there's Loma Prieta, which is really Loma Prieta. You see the Bayview Hotel right near where the sign says Aptos is the Bayview Hotel. I think that's still standing, although we've seen it in various iterations over the years. I used to live in Aptos when I first came to Santa Cruz in '74. I lived on Aptos Beach Drive by Wixon, and then I moved to Madison Lane, right above near where Lucille Aldrich used to live. So I'm a little bit familiar with Aptos. And this is really kind of an interesting map. So you can see this, you know, how it's changed. You see the railroad tracks. And now what you don't see on the map here is New Leaf, because this was 1888. Anyway, so a note about UCSC's maps. They've taken most of the maps down. They're not available. They're working on a system to make them available to the public. So this is what they put up on their website. But once again, they do have Sanborn Maps available online. They have a new system, a new company they acquired the maps from, and they're really high quality and very easy to use. Maybe a little bit better than the Library of Congress. Anyway, let's move on to another Sanborn fire insurance map. Here's a shot from Berkeley Way. And you can note that house numbers change, as I mentioned. You can see the current number against the property line and the old number. You can also see, in this case, I think they have odd and even on the same side of the street. And these are available. Here's some dates I give you at the bottom: 1886, 88, 92, 1905, 28, 1950. And all of these are available in black and white at Santa Cruz Public Library. And what I might note about that is with black and white, you don't get the differentiation in terms of the type of property. Is it made out of wood? Is it brick? Is it stucco? What is it? So that's one of the trade-offs why you will probably want to use a color map for that purpose. Okay, here's an example of a standard map service. And what's interesting about this 1931 shot is it shows the property owners. So when you're doing research on a property, you might use this to confirm the information you discovered. Or if you've run into a roadblock and you can't find something, you might go back to one of these maps and see, well, who owned the property? That'll help spur your research into the ownership of it. In this case, it's 1408 Broadway, and you can see the names of the owners on here. So that's very useful information if it fits into the time parameter that you're researching. One other map that is the key map for the history of Santa Cruz County is the Hatch map. This is a cadastral that shows property owners on these large swaths of land in the county. Now, there's a really good copy of it at the Library of Congress. High resolution, you can blow it up. The map itself, the original map, is enormous. I mean, it's 4 or 5 feet across. It's gigantic. One really useful publication that came out last year was Stan Stevens' Names on the Map, published by the Museum of Art and History. And in it, he has a little bit of a history of the owners of the property. It has an index in the back where you can look up, like, Mr. Cahoon to find out what property he owned that happens to be near Casaleños. Is an example I've learned about recently. And that's up Old Soquel San Jose Road. So this is a really useful map to go back historically and establish ownership of a given area, the Hatch maps. Foreman and Wright map for City of Santa Cruz might not be of that much interest to people in the county, but very detailed in terms of ownership in 1866. This is a shot of Beach Hill. And these names are familiar, and you can see how property names have changed. Jacob Leibrandt, well, it's Leibrandt. At some point, it was Leibrandt without the I. And I don't know the history of that, but you can see, you can get an idea of the history of a particular property. It gives you the acreage. And this is very useful if you're researching within the city of Santa Cruz. Baldwin Survey Map from 1923. This really is very helpful if you're working in the city. It shows you large swaths of development, like what is on this particular map. Frank Smith, they own a whole swath of property that was developed later. The Chase building lots, and some of the larger areas, the names are on the map. So that's very useful to you as well. So building permits. So now you've looked at the recorder's office, you've done research on the actual property, you've gotten a lot of deeds going back. How do you know when the house was built? Well, fortunately, the newspapers carried information on building permits until about the mid-1920s. Santa Cruz City Council issued them. You'll also find building permit information for county buildings. County permits are online from 85 to date. Prior to that, you have to go to the zoning counter. So this helps establish when a property was built. This particular example is Pedro Chisholm's house on Berkeley Way. Here's a notice in the newspaper. He applied for a $4,000 residence in 1910. There's a report in the paper. And one of the things you notice in the newspaper is there are spelling errors. Here they call them P. Chisoled. So you might miss that if you're searching in one of the newspaper indexes. It won't pick it up because it's misspelled. So this is a really useful way to establish when a property might have been built, getting the building permit. Okay, so further on with the roadmap on our journey. Newspapers. Newspapers are have transitioned over the years. They're much more useful now. I used to go down to the public library and search through the volumes that are in genealogy on newspaper indexes, the printed indexes, and go to the microfilm. It was a real slog. In 2012, newspapers.com went online, and they do local regional newspapers. I mean, there are thousands of newspapers on there now. And there are 2 levels. You can get a more advanced level, which takes some major newspapers, or you can get the cheaper level, which just does local ones. It's available at the public library, so you don't need to have your own subscription. So they cover the Sentinel, Evening News, Santa Cruz Surf. There are gaps in the newspaper coverage, uh, and the public library has all of these on microfilm. And there are some gaps in the Sentinel, a significant gap. So it's a very useful tool. I'll go back to that for a second. One of the things about newspapers.com, and you may have already discovered this, is the search engine. You get frustrated with it because it's only as good as the data that's inputted. And with newspapers, these are optical character recognition databases where they scan the microfilm. This is not keyed in. It's not precise. And the problem they run into is that the type fonts varied among newspapers, although there was a limited number of them. And the quality varies. You know, some of these newspapers are smudgy. They're dirty. You can't recognize the characters. So you will get, when you search things in newspapers, a lot of what I call false drops. Not appropriate. It's not the result you want. And you'll also notice when a word is hyphenated, that sometimes you won't be able to find it because it doesn't pick up the hyphenation. So word to the weary. But it is the premier source. So another approach that I've taken, outside of going through the recorder's office and looking at all the deeds, you can discover, if you get a couple of names of somebody who owned a property, and you can actually trace quite a bit of information about a property through using newspapers. Combine that with the city directories, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You can actually uncover a good deal of information without having to go to the recorder's office. And a lot of times it's much easier to do this. You can do this from home. You don't have to go anywhere else, but you just need a place to start. You need a couple of names, and then and very often in newspapers, in the early days, they don't do that anymore. But, you know, the time period that we're looking at in 1950s on back, you will see references to property changes. You know, so-and-so bought property from so-and-so. So that's a really helpful and less frustrating place to start than going directly to the recorder's office. Watsonville has its own historic newspaper archive. I think there's a link there is a link at the public library, and you can go directly to the Watsonville newspaper archive to search Watsonville newspapers. And I threw this in here because I thought it'd be interesting. The Poweronian wins a Pulitzer Award. Now, it's probably the only newspaper in Santa Cruz County that's ever won a Pulitzer. And I think that's worth noting. You know, in the days when newspapers reported on local events, they uncovered scandals, they investigated jurisdictions. And now what you get is a repetition of national and international news with mostly obituaries. So maybe that's the only reason you subscribe to local papers. And I didn't see my name in the paper in the obituary column, so that's why I'm here today. Anyway, another source is the California Digital Newspaper Collection, CDNC. This is done at the University of California, Riverside. A lot of information here migrates over to newspapers.com. So you will note that if you go to newspapers.com, you're pretty much covering everything, except for the fact that Daily Alta was the newspaper of record in California during the gold rush up until 1891, and the Sacramento Daily Union. You will find these in the California Digital Newspaper Collection. So that's a good reason to go there if you're looking for content beyond just Santa Cruz. And it's amazing what you can find about Santa Cruz that might appear in these other newspapers. The other thing it has more precise searching using Boolean operators, which I used to use in my previous career. And I don't expect you'll be doing that. But in any event, that's there if you know how to do that. Newsbank is a database available at the public library. It covers the Sentinel 1999 to present. One thing you'll note about the Sentinel in newspapers.com is it cuts off at 2005. They don't have licensing rights for anything after that. So if you want recent information on the Chronicle, the Mercury News, or the Sentinel, you've got to go to the public library. And this is really relatively easy to use. You can do phrase searching. You can limit by the newspaper, and it covers things pretty well. Another source at the public library is the New York Times, which I'll show you an example of that later. One of the people that I researched for this talk has his obituary in the New York Times. Pretty important person. But anyway, you can find out, you'd be amazed what you can find about Santa Cruz. Now, currently, they cover a lot about California in the Times, and it's available at the public library. City directories, phone books. Now, these are really key to establishing the parameters of a property's existence. If you have a name, you can look in the city directory to find out if they live there. When it changed, there are bound city directories and phone books in the public library downtown, and they're very helpful. You can go through under name, or they have all the people lived out in the county, but those are under rural routes. But you can find stuff. Here's an example of Rose Rostron, who was one of the first county supervisor, lived on Berkeley Way. And this is an example of U.S. city directories that exist in Ancestry.com, which I'll talk about briefly. And there's a list on the right-hand side of all the city directories that are on Ancestry. There are gaps, obviously. But I'd say, if you can't get the Ancestry, which you can use through the public library, you can go down and look at the physical volumes. I know that the Museum of Art and History has certain city directories that you can find. But, the combination of looking in newspapers for clues to when a property was sold, looking in the city directories to when new owners came and bought the property. One caveat about city directories that when the person came to the door to solicit the information, people who gave that information were not necessarily the property owners. So you have to be aware of that from time to time. So Ancestry, discovering the property owners. So let's say you go through newspapers and you get all the title research done and you've got a whole bunch of names of people, but what do you know about them? Well, if you can't find much about them in the local newspapers, or even if you can, this is the premier source, Ancestry.com, online at the public library. I have my own subscription, but it is amazing the records they have. I mean, you can define things by census and voter records when someone lived in a particular house. You can get birth, marriage, and death records. Not always, but they're really pretty substantial. Immigration records. You want to search somebody who came over here from Sweden in the 19th century. You can often find immigration records in the ship that they came in on. You can find military service records. And once again, you can find city directories. And another really useful aspect of it, it's called public member trees. A lot of the relatives have developed their own trees, historic tree of these individuals. And they'll put them up. And some of them are really very helpful and very useful. Others are people just copy the tree that someone else made. And what they're doing, if the tree has errors, they're just copying the errors. So you've got to be careful with public member trees. They can be deceptive and misleading. But they're very helpful. And a lot of them have a good deal of history about somebody. Photographs, high school yearbook information, all kinds of data. You'd be surprised. And many of you already use this, so I'm not probably telling you anything new. Heritage Quest, which is also a subset of Ancestry.com, is available at the public library in Santa Cruz. Okay, one other source, a couple of other sources that you may have used, or you may not know about, is the Rollin collection card file at UCSC. Rollin was a newspaper man, wrote for the local papers, and he kept these clipping files of information about people, developed his own database of individuals. And his wife, Jeanette, typed them up, and he developed this big card file. Well, that card file is now available at UCSC, and you can download it. So if you're really stuck, or you go there anyway, you really want to find out as much as you can about an individual, you go to the Rollin card file, download it, and search it. It's really not, it's easy to do. It's a PDF, you can search it. It shouldn't be a problem. But there's a lot of little tidbits about individuals it's very helpful. Another aspect of the Rollin file is the Rancho documents. Now, this depends on nature of research. If you're doing a lot of research in early California history, it's worth checking this out because he has a lot of data on who owned ranchos, who they were, and it gives you access to other information. So the Rollin card file is a real gold mine if you know how to use it. And this is a screenshot from the Online Archive of California, which describes it, but there's also a link to UCSC, and you can download the actual documents. It's an index to the documents, not documents yourself. Okay, where can I find historic photos? So you got all your information, you know who these people are, you got your newspaper data, you're beginning to establish a record, but you don't have any photos. You don't even know what these people look like. You don't even know what the house looks like in the old days. I mean, you may have a current view of it. So in the last couple of years, UCSC has taken a lot of those archives they've had, the Preston Story collection and various others, and they have digitized them. And it's a pretty amazing database. They have over 11,000 images. And you can browse it. It's a little kludgy to use, but you can get there. It's a rich source. There's also a rich source at the Ma Archives. And I suggest you check that out as well and talk to Jessie, who's the archivist at Ma. She's a trained archivist. She has her degrees. She knows what she's doing, and she's a professional. So I would check Ma out if you really get stuck looking for a photo. There's also a local history collection at the public library, 1860s, 2000. It's a pretty useful file as well. So you got an array of choices for photos. One other source that I'll mention is Cavello & Cavello. It's a for-profit company. They have the Ed Weber collection, and I think there are people on the commission who are very familiar with it. But they have some really high quality photos that you can acquire, you can pay for them, and use in your research. Okay, so how do I find out if my house is listed? Well, the example I give here is City of Santa Cruz, because City of Santa Cruz has over 600 properties on the historic survey. So they have a very rich pile of data. So just as an example of how this is created, you're on the commission, you know how DPRs are created, the history of a property. This is an example where they take the DPR, they distill it into the record that appears in the Historic Building Survey. All of these are available online at the city. You can download the actual documents, the actual historic surveys. The DPRs themselves aren't up there yet. They used to be, but you keep asking for them. They might appear someday. Okay, Built Environment Resource Database. It's called the BIRD, so I don't know why they came up with that. But if you want to get the BIRD, you go to the Office of Historic Preservation. And what is it? Well, it's an inventory of all historic properties in the state of California by city. So the example I give you, it's a spreadsheet. You can download it, and it will list all the historic properties, where they're located, and it'll give the evaluation on the far right-hand side of this example. You can see, excuse me, there's a number code, and you can get the status codes from the OHP. It tells you, is this actually on the register? Is it eligible? Does it need to be reevaluated, and so forth? So you can look up every house in the county that's on the historic list and its status. So this bird database is relatively new. I think they just put it up last year. So another useful source that's, just download it. You never know when you're going to need it. Okay, historic context statements. Now, I discovered when I created this that there are a lot of historic context statements for the county. The city of Watsonville, there's the Capitola one, done by Carolyn Swift. 1994, the earliest one here is the one done by the county. Now, these are surveys that give you a context for the community, how it developed, the character of the community, what it's known for, why does it exist, patterns of development. So they're very useful. And I suggest you want to learn about, before you tear down some building, what's the context of it? Take a look at it. Architectural styles. This is shouldn't be controversial, but it depends. People differ about styles, and sometimes it's confusing. Sidewalk Companion, Santa Cruz Architecture, has, in the back of it, has a description of styles that apply to Santa Cruz and mostly the county. There's a field guide to American houses, 848 pages. It's an enormous volume, done by Virginia McAllister, and it came out in the 1880s. This is the update. She finished it, and she passed away in 2019, but this is a masterful work of descriptions, of detail of houses. You want to know, what do they call that little thingamajig up in the corner of the window? That kind of thing. This will give you that kind of detail. It's also available in paperback, so you needn't spend an arm and a leg for it if you want to acquire it. There's some other useful sources on the internet I've used before, something called Antique Home Style. And so obviously these are the key sources, but you can find stuff on the internet. It's not terribly difficult. Google things. Here's an example of architectural style descriptions. This is an example from McAllister, example from the Historic Building Survey of the City of Santa Cruz, and architectural style glossary from the Sidewalk Companion. So there's all kinds of information about descriptions. Now, when I developed this for the presentation this week, and you'll see in the second half of this talk, I aggregated all that I could, all the books that exist currently on descriptions of individuals and where they live. So I went through all the books available, and I came across the Aptos history that's on, I don't know, whatever, the Arcadia. Yeah, I mean, Arcadia books are pretty good. It's not a narrative, so don't expect to receive a narrative history, but it covers the key points. So this is the Vicente Castro house in Aptos, the Bartley Crum family who owned it from 42 to 52. And I'll get to Bartley and his family in just a second. But this is an example of what appeared in the Aptos History Museum published with Kevin Newhouse, Arcadia publication. There's a little description of the history of the house. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I were reading, how we came to this. We listened to podcasts, and one of the podcasters had Patricia Bosworth on there. And I said, well, who's Patricia Bosworth? What it turns out is that she's really a well-accomplished writer, and she was a brief time an actress. And she and her family lived in Aptos at the Vicente Castro house from 42 to 52. And she gives a lot of details in her autobiography. She passed away in that's a mistake. She passed away in 2020 from coronavirus, and she was in her 80s. She appeared in The Nun Story with Audrey Hepburn, and she wrote a biography of Marlon Brando, Diane Arbus, Montgomery Clift, and she wrote for Vanity Fair and several other publications. But that picture on the left-hand side from 1997, that's a biography of her family. That she's on the left, that's her mother, Gertrude, her brother, Bart, and Bartley Crum himself. That is a picture taken from the Vicente Castro house. So they had a big rose garden there, and it's an interesting story. But you can learn a lot about what was Aptos like in the 1940s. You know, apparently it was a big, a relatively secluded community for weekenders from San Francisco and the Bay Area came down here and would party on the weekends. So here's the deed that I got on the house when Bartley Crum bought it in 1942. And it's a long description of the property and eight point some acres. And that property, obviously that description changed because it's part of the Vicente Castro Rancho. So it whittled down and down and down and down to what it is today. I also discovered I just searched this on the internet. I said, well, what's out there? Let me just search, see if I can find information on the Vicente Castro house. So I uncovered on the internet, and it's a county document. This is a DPR done in 2001. And I know you can't read it, but if you get a chance to look at it, and they have this god-awful typescript done with Courier type font, which is a monospaced, and it's very hard to read in these long strings, but the content is very useful. This is one of the best DPRs I've seen. And that's part of why I'm doing this, is that, you know, when you see these consultant reports, you see DPRs, they vary a great deal. And it's sort of emblematic of the extent to which the writer will do research to create information about a particular structure. Some of them are very good, like this particular one that was done in 2001 for the county. Others are really, you know, you can just look at it and say, well, why didn't they do this? So it's just a word, you know, you know this, you've seen them yourselves. But I just wanted to show you this example, and I got some clues from this. You know, I already we read the two books by Patricia Bosworth, and but out of that, you know, that's how I got interested in this. I said, well, this is interesting. Never heard of this guy, Bartley Crum. Well, Bartley Crum was a big-time attorney in San Francisco. He represented William Randolph Hearst in the early days. His family's from Sacramento, went to Cal, and he was a politician, involved working with politicians. He was an advisor to Wendell Willkie in the 1940 presidential campaign. He was an advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He got involved with liberal causes, and in the 1950s, he was representing the Hollywood 10 during the those hearings in Congress where they were trying to ferret out commies, pinkos. So he thought they would win, and obviously they didn't. And he was blackballed. He saw his financial fortune decline. And finally, by the late 1950s, he took a bottle of Seconal and a quart of whiskey and killed himself. But that's, you know, that's part of the history. I mean, this is the guy. His family owned the property from 42 to 52. They installed an elaborate rose garden. They did all kinds of these enhancements. And Bosworth wrote lovingly of Aptos in her biography and the biography of her family. So it's kind of an interesting book. So I also went back and went through the GIS. the county GIS, to look at what maps are available in the Aptos Rancho. And they're right out there. This is from 1858 survey. I think this is 6,685 acres. I wonder what that would be worth today. Other maps I found, 1927, this is the Fred Tillman property, was later owned by Bartley Crum. Here's a sub-shot of the Mangles Estate map that I found at the county. And this is the actual outline of the property that was developed by Joseph Miller. Miller was the senior, was a dentist in San Jose, and he owned a lot of property in Santa Cruz, particularly this property. And he's the source of the Dr. Miller's Cafe Pergolesi in downtown Santa Cruz. That was one of his houses. Anyway, so all kinds of interesting characters associated with these homes. Here's I've forgotten where I got this photo. Here's a 1920s photo, and this is Rancho Del Mar without Safeway. And you can see the house in the distance and what it looked like in the 1920s. It was rural. Okay, so that's what I have to tell you about searching the history of your house. What time? It's about 11:22. We could take a break now if you want, and then I'll go through the handout, which encompasses a lot of what I talked about today. And then we could answer questions, or if you, whatever. Okay. So do you want to take a break,
Yeah.
guys?
Quick
Okay.
break. Quick break.
What do we want? 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
It's almost
make it-
lunchtime. Yeah, whatever,
So if-
how much time you need, I'll be here. And I apologize. The video worked on Friday when I went through this with people, and now it doesn't. So you don't need to see my mug, but that's life.
Okay, why don't we take a break? I have 11:23.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so 10 minutes, that'll make it 33.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's fine. I'll be here.
Okay,
All right, very good.
I'm gonna run down and get 2 more 3 hours.
I'm gonna take a nap. Okay, all right, good.
Let's see. Yeah. Oh.
We're taking a 10-minute break. That's it, right? That shouldn't take too long. Huh? This is anyway. Yeah. Shouldn't take too long. Yeah. Yeah. It's a summarizing what I told you. Here's the breaking news. Academy members hold heated, divided meeting on the Will Smith slap. That was totally bullshit. He shouldn't have done that. It's a macho man. Well, it was not a bad, it was not the greatest joke, but so what? You know that G.I. Jane, that's the one where that Demi Moore has her head shaved and she's doing the basic training. That's what her head looked like. Not making fun of her. But probably didn't. Okay, I'm back at the workstation. Yeah. So I'm back at it. Christ.
Joe, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let's call the meeting back to order at 11:35. And Joe, you're back on.
Okay, everyone.
And Joe, you will need to share your screen one more time, just so you know.
Oh, okay, I shared it, but then it disappeared. Okay. Yeah, just a second. Oh, it took it away. Okay. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, Joe.
Can you see it now?
Nope.
You don't see it now?
Nope. Try sharing your screen again.
Yeah, okay, let me close that. And just a second. Christ. Oh, God. Fuck. Yeah. All right. All right, now we're back. Okay, now the icon's here. right. Can you see anything now?
Nope, it looks like we cannot see your screen.
Okay, you can't see it either, again.
Nope.
You know, it was up here. What the hell? Okay. Okay, I'm closing the share tray and I'm starting over. Open share tray.
Hmm.
Okay, and then I'll click on the document.
I would try sharing your screen because that seems to work a little better. Is that an option to share your screen?
Yeah, that's.
Excuse me.
Oh, here, it finally came up with the allow thing. It has to allow me to do that. Okay.
There we go. Yep.
How much did you pay for this software? So you can see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
And you can just make
Yeah.
that full screen.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. So, I went through that previous presentation fairly quickly, and I know it's relatively dense and there's a lot of detail. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if you have questions or if you might be a little mystified. So now's your chance to ask questions. What this handout is pretty much a distillation of what I just told you. And it's basically a little background on where to start. And I'll go through this. At the end, there's a table of, well, you can see it. You've got a copy of it. A table of where the Sanborn maps are located. And, I was thinking, printing this is fine, but this is a dynamic business where URLs change all the time and UCSC's development changes, so I'd rather just make it available online because it's easier to update. And you'll notice there are a lot of links in here. What I really want, if people have any questions or something doesn't work, or if they don't think this is correct, that kind of feedback is very helpful to me. And so please let me know what you think. Now, I'm going to go through these pages, and a lot of it is a repetition of what you've already heard. But this would be a guide that you could use later if you need to. And one thing it did stimulate me is to ask the recorder what that information is at the bottom of the assessor's record, what that information is in terms of when it says transfers. I see this date that says 1776. And I said, well, we weren't quite doing property deeds in 1776 in California. So what does that mean? I think it's some kind of internal data they use for themselves, but I'll see if I can find out. So I'm going through basically what I've shown you on the presentation, and I know if you can't see it, let me know. My goal is to improve the quality of the graphics. Some of this stuff are screenshots, and if I can print it out and scan it, there'd be much higher resolution. And what I'm doing now is going through the recorder's office using the tools that they have, the old historic before 1977 workstations and the current ones from 78 to date. A little bit about Sandport fire insurance maps. This, we don't, if you want to ask any questions, just interrupt me. So here's some more examples of the key to the maps, the Sanborn maps. What I found useful is I can trace the development of a street like Berkeley Way. You can see the two Sanborn maps juxtaposed and how the street changed. Properties developed from 28 to 1950. And there was a tremendous amount of development in the county in the 1920s after World War I. Big boom time for development projects. And there's some more examples of sources to get information on Sanborn Maps. Library of Congress collection is pretty good. You can download all of them. They don't have everything, but it's a very large digital file. So they don't have 1928 and 1950, which right now you can only get at the public library, and it's not even available at UCSC. And I think it has to do with copyright. It's after 1923. So the people that own that copyright are ProQuest in Michigan. And I know the people there. I used to work with them years ago. And I think you had to go to the San Francisco Public Library to get it. The thing to look in if you really want to get Sanborn Maps, check out the San Jose Public Library. I understand, and I haven't validated this, that you can go there as a citizen of the state, show an ID, you can get access. So that might be an avenue if you're inclined to make the journey to San Jose Public Library, which is co-joined with San Jose State University. So the next thing I have are the land ownership maps, and you can see the development patterns from one era to 1931 to 1947. And some more examples of maps. Examples of building permits. This kind of reinforces what I told you in the presentation. So I'll just whip through it unless you have some objection or question. Historic photos, pretty much what I've told you. Context statements, a little information about that, more about the architectural styles, field guide to American houses, and a couple other things. Now I'm going to get into the area of the Sanborn map list and sources for information. On the screen here is the Museum Art and History reprint of Eliot. Eliot, this is what, 1870s or some 1879. He has the histories of a lot of individuals in the county. So if your history takes you back that far, you can find out a good deal about these individuals. Not everyone's in there, but it's a good collection. And then I talk about Leon Rowland. And one source that I think is very useful, gives it some kind of context for searching house histories, is a book put out by the museum. Every Structure Tells a Story, and it's available on the website of the Museum of Art and History as a downloadable PDF. So this is how I got interested in this, because I remember when this book came out, and it's sort of a print version of what I'm trying to do over the internet. And it's sort of a legendary source that is worth looking at. It's still valid today, and it's still worth looking at. And there's my email address if you have any questions or comments. Now, the appendix is...
Excuse me, Joe.
Yeah, sure.
I see two different email addresses. Is it the Gmail one to use now versus the Pac Bell?
I have two email addresses. You can use
Yes.
either one.
Okay. Do you have a
Yeah.
preference?
No.
Okay. All
No.
right. Just want to clear
Either
that
one.
up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I have many identities. There you go.
Okay, good.
The appendix is, I went through this because it drives you crazy trying to find Sanborn maps. Where are they? Who has them? Are they electronic? Are they in color, black and white? So I created this table of locations, and obviously this is subject to change, because if UCSC comes through and makes those Sanborns available online, you won't have to go up there and use that other system. Although it's a pretty good system. It's a really intuitive interface. It's very easy to use and high quality indexes. But anyway, so here's what I've discovered in terms of Aptos, Ben Lomond, Boulder Creek. This is based on the Sanborn maps are obviously based on where people live. If you live in a rural area, you don't have a lot of houses. We're not going to make a Sanborn map for 10 people living on a road. It has to be some density involved. So in a way, you can trace the development of these communities by the implementation of a Sanborn map when they were created, when they became dense enough where insurers would need to have that information. The maps of Corlitos, Felton, Freedom, Pajaro, Santa Cruz, Soquel, and Watsonville. And I reproduced, once again, the Aptos map showing the Bayview Hotel and the Loma Prieta Lumber Company. That database at UCSC is created by historical information gatherers, and they do a lot of other data for institutions and companies. But it's pretty high quality, I have to say. I was impressed with the presentation, easy to use. And the people up there at McHenry are pretty helpful. They don't have a reference department anymore. And I have to confess that annoys me because I used to be head of reference services at UCSC from 74 to 80, and now it's, a bunch of terminals and, it's hit or miss. But there's a student there who will answer your questions about using the workstations. So you can rely on that. Okay, sources. What I did here was try to develop the books that exist or are published today that are helpful in terms of identifying individuals in the community. And obviously it's all over the map. You've got Tracy Bliss's work. You've got Don Clark's work, which is fundamental because he goes into a lot of information about. Don Clark used to be UCSC librarian years ago, and he developed a file of information on geographic names and place names, and it's extremely useful in terms of you want to know about the development of a particular creek, what it was called, when it got started. That's the work to look in. Anything like that. And Jeffrey Dunn's work. And actually a really good source, George Fogelson's History of Jewish People in Santa Cruz. He's got a tremendous amount of detail information on individuals. It's really remarkable. He spent years creating this thing and came out a couple of years ago. And it's very helpful. Some other sources, if I could even read the screen. Oh, the Genealogy Society. Yeah. The genealogists years ago created a lot of newspaper indexes, and they're still valid today. You can still look at these print bound volumes that are at the library, and you used to be able to buy them. I think if you go to the Genealogical Society website, they have a list of sources. There's a lot of useful data there. They put out a couple of books on permits that you're not, that's a shortcut way to find permits as opposed to finding them in newspapers.com, although you need both. You really do need both. So they're a great source of information that has now been subsumed by electronic sources. And I think they have one large, I call it a concatenated database of all the newspaper indexes they produced over the years into one online file. So that's worth looking at. And other local sources. I tried to make this so it encompasses parts of the county, like Boulder Creek, Barbara Kennedy's book on Boulder Creek houses. One thing I'll note is that there seems to be anything published before 2012, when if you do a lot of research on newspapers, you realize that anything published years ago, you almost have to go back and redo it in a way, because the amount of data that you can find now compared to what you could find manually by going through newspapers is night and day. So there's a lot more information available now than was used to. And that's generally all over the place. All kinds of archives available at Bancroft, Berkeley, UCSC, so forth. Margaret Koch's book on Parade of the Past. I mean, the thing is that there may be mistakes in these earlier books, but put it upon yourself to find out what the real answer is, because I can understand why people miss things, because they're really hard to find. I spent how many hours down looking at microfilm when the sidewalk came out to do as a research assistant, looking through old newspapers. It's just tedious. It's so much easier now, so much better. And you already know that. I'm not telling you anything new. So a couple of other things. Betty Lewis's volumes on Watsonville. Sandy Leiden, 2 volumes on Japanese and Chinese. And of course, Carolyn Swift is represented here, as she is later in this sources list. Book on, what else we got? Oh, Blossoms into Gold, about the Croatians in Watsonville. All of these have information about families, names of individuals that you might find useful. And a lot of these are Arcadia books. We've got Scotts Valley, and you can see them all here. And one interesting book at the bottom here is Phyllis Patton's tome. Oh, that reminds me. She has a lot of information. I mean, the title doesn't tell you anything, but the book is really quite interesting because she has a lot. She lived here. I don't know. She died in the 60s or 70s, but she lived there a long time, and she knew a lot of people, and she wrote about them. So there's a lot of detail about individuals. If you're doing research and you want to find out about somebody, that's a really good source. Although the title doesn't tell you a lot. Susan Pace's book on the Castro. This is a monumental work. I mean, it took her. She's passed away, but it took her years to do this, and it's very helpful, useful book. Stephen Payne's book. I put this in here because he still, I think, lives up in the Summit area, and it's about the early developers of that area. So I think it's very useful, well written. He's a scholar, so he knows what he's doing. Lisa Robinson's book on San Lorenzo Valley and the Flume, which is a small little book, but there are a lot of details on the Flume and the people that helped develop the Flume. And Leon Rollins' book on early Santa Cruz. It gives you a lot of history about the early development of the county. And of course, the historic building surveys, which I mentioned earlier. Elliott, which I've told you about already. And Survey of California Pioneers. This volume has dozens of histories of people that lived in Santa Cruz in the 19th century. Most of the people came here before the gold rush, before 1850. Excuse me. And there are a lot of sources in there. So it's another one of these great local history books. The book on the Skyline story, that's about Highway 35 and the people lived up in the Santa Cruz Mountains along that road. And it came out 2014, almost 8 years ago. Very useful. I mean, this is all spotty because people do their own little niches and they develop those stories. But so you have to go everywhere. There is no overall history of Santa Cruz County, multi-volume, whatever. Doesn't exist. Well, there's 19th century. There are a couple of volumes. Martin's book on Santa Cruz, but that's way out of date. Book on the SoCal Pioneer Historic Association. another Carolyn Swift publication, came out in 2011. Very well done. And History Capitola. The last volume here, and I'm sure you all know about this. This is a downloadable volume you can get from the Secretary Interior. It's the Standards of Rehabilitation. And what I find interesting about this, it actually goes into great detail about, and this is off the track of house histories, it's about evaluating structures, what's the proper way to repair a porch, repair windows, etc., what you do and what you don't do, the kind of materials you use. And you don't have to, I've got a paper copy, but you can download it easily. And there's all kinds of information at the Secretary Interior in terms of technical guides to somebody who wants to repair their porch. What's the proper way to do it? How do you repair your windows? That kind of stuff. So there's another fount of information at the Department of the Interior. So anyway, that's the handout, and I hope you find it useful. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. So we're right on time, 11:58. Okay.
Joe, it's Neil Woods.
Yeah, hi, Neil.
Thank you so much for this. Just really appreciate the top to bottom overview. It's extremely helpful to me as one of the newer members, of this group here. So I really appreciate it. I had a quick question. I've long been interested in the history of some of the commercial projects in Santa Cruz, and the one in particular is at Water Street and where Market dead ends and goes, and Dakota Street comes from the south into it. It's that, I don't even know what architecture you would call it. It's where those commercial offices are, dentists and stuff, and the buildings all have those little circles and they're circle parking. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Are you talking about the medical offices?
Yes.
That are off of...
What is the history? Where do I find that? I mean,
well,
that is so fascinating.
Boy, this is a gift. It's in the Sidewalk Companion.
Okay.
It was going to be on the cover, but that was vetoed. It was developed in the 1950s, and I don't remember the architect, but it's like a Frank Lloyd Wright influence.
Yes.
Yeah. They didn't want to be on the Historic Building Survey because they wanted to perhaps someday, they didn't want to encumber.
Well, listen, these are the most difficult ones to save, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Neil, I can dig up a couple of things I can send you as references. Yeah, that's a unique building because
that's just a marvel of the consistency in that development design, and it would just be a shame nationwide to lose something of that significance. And I've always just thought, those sometimes are the most misunderstood architectural gems.
Yeah, it is.
Well, and yet they're so worth fighting for and preserving.
Well, why don't you send me your email? I'll see what I can dig up on it, and I'll consult with the other half of my brain, my wife, Judy, and see what she knows. I remember this now because everyone was excited about it because there's so few buildings of that genre in Santa Cruz.
Yes.
It's not a Victorian, it's not a East Lake, it's a modern building, and it'd be nice to have something like that. It's so different.
It's so completely different.
Yeah.
The history of that, to know if that architect, what other projects there were, were they similar? It's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well,
I'll email you.
Yeah, I'll send me an email and I'll respond and see what I can do. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
Joe, where's that building again?
It's at Water Street and Reed Way. There's a traffic light there. Okay, you're heading South County on Water Street at Ocean.
Okay.
It's on the right. It's a medical dental complex. It's a series of small little offices, but it's done in a very modernistic style, very clean lines.
Water and Ocean?
Yeah, it's not at Ocean, but it's...
Oh.
If you're on Water Street heading south towards Aptos in that direction, it's on the right-hand side. and there's a traffic light there right by a bridge, by Branciforte Creek.
There's
Um,
that Dig Gardens is right there on the
yeah,
right.
Dig Gardens, there's a Goodyear tire store there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and the entrance and exit is right at the traffic light there.
Yeah.
So it's right at where Branciforte Creek crosses Water Street.
I think Annie's trying to bring it up.
You could probably see it from the county building. If you stand on the roof. Yeah.
Let's see.
Well, it's one of our more unique properties in all of
Yeah,
San.
it is. It's a neat property.
Yeah.
Oh, you could go, yeah. Are you getting there?
Now,
You go the
I have
other
a
way.
hard time doing the little, oh, gosh, what did that do?
Go
Yeah.
down, yeah.
I think we went inside someone's gym.
No, you're on the wrong side of the street.
You're on the wrong side of the street. Whip around.
Okay, okay. Keep going down the street that way. That's it. Keep going down the street.
Towards the county
Go,
building
Yeah,
or
go to the works of
No, no,
Ramada.
away from the county building.
oh, wait, okay, so this way.
Yeah,
Yeah, keep
go down the
going.
street that way.
Keep
Okay,
going.
you're almost there. There's a motel.
Going.
So, isn't it here?
Yeah.
Or-
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
that's it. Look in there. There it is.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's 550 Water Street.
That's at 550 Water Street. I
Oh,
couldn't
there we
think of
go.
that. But you go in, if you drive inside, they've got these, I don't know what they are, arcades or,
Oh, yeah. The lighting is fascinating.
yeah, see, it's almost Asian style,
It's
pagoda
fascinating.
Yeah,
style.
that feel a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a hat, isn't it? Blind saucer.
Well, just a quick aside, before I moved here in '89, I lived in Napa, and downtown Napa was going through a transition, and we all fought to save what was known as the Oberon building, and it was this modern style, right?
Yeah,
All ceramic tiles, and people thought it was just such these square corners, and thought it was such an ugly style building, and we fought and fought to save that
oh, wow.
as an example of that, and we
Uh-huh.
prevailed. And now it is one of the more popular bars in all of downtown Santa Cruz, and is just a shining example of saving that architecture for that period.
Yeah, it is.
So you
Yeah,
run
I
into
know.
great resistance sometimes with these when people don't recognize the uniqueness of some of these properties.
Right.
Yeah.
And at least in the canon, we don't really have many buildings from this time period in the inventory, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the
it's
only thing about this building is not protected. but-
Right, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Well, you can see both points of view, but, now with SB9, it might be an advantage to be a historic property because depending on your point of view, you can add an ADU, but you can't add 4 units,
Right.
So that's something to consider. Yeah, that's a neat place. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll see what I can find about it.
All right,
I
thank
know
you.
information's out there. Just send me an email.
Okay, we'll do.
Yeah, thank you.
Joe,
Yeah,
on some of these books that you have listed, I'm looking at specifically Leon Rowland's Santa Cruz, the early years.
yeah.
And you have where it is, who published it. But
Well-
where would I be able to get a copy of that? It isn't listed that it's in the public library.
Well, I didn't list the location for all the books, but I expect it's out of print. I would think it's, you can get a copy at the public library, or you can go on to ABE Books or Amazon as a out of print used copy.
Okay.
I think there might be copies out there. There's all kinds of stuff you wouldn't think you could find, but it exists in Amazon or ABE Books. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I did want to point out that you have Alberta's book on Davenport listed, which I think is great.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think you also had a question, Alberta, about a resource that wasn't listed here.
Frank Perry put out a book on the lime quarries up in the North Coast. and I cannot remember the name of that book.
Lime Kiln Legacies.
Line Kill Legacies, okay.
Isn't that
And it's full of stories about the people that lived up there.
well,
And
I'll add that.
that was
Yeah.
going on in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. So if somebody's looking for some old, relatives, they might.
Yeah, I have yeah, that's a good suggestion. That's a Museum of Art and publication. It's a,
Yeah,
I think, yeah. So, yeah, I know Bob Hawarsik worked on it and a lot of people worked on it. Yeah, I'll add that because I should know about that because I used to be on the board of the lime kilns. But yeah, okay, that's a good suggestion. I'll add that. See, that's why you want to do this electronically. You don't want to put this in print. I mean, as soon as you publish it, it's out of date. So I'm going to see if I can get a copy on the public library so people can download it. They have my earlier version I did last year for the history fair, which is coming up in May again, or 2 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah, thank you, Alberta. That's a good suggestion.
okay, you're welcome.
Joe, Linda was asking if we can also have a copy of your PowerPoint presentation, and I could post that with this meeting as well online.
Oh,
if
yeah,
you're-
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I can, let's see, it's a very large file. I can reduce it in Apple Key Point. I can read whatever Keynote. I can reduce the size so it's not so enormous, and I can just upload it, I think, send it to you.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I'll post it in our notes so they can access that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you're, late at night, you can't sleep, just call it up and look at it.
Joe, did you happen to mention that there will be a history fair this year?
The Museum of Art and History is sponsoring a history fair. Oh God, let me get rid of this screen. And it's in May, middle of May, during History Month. If you go to the MA website, they'll have a story about it. It's their development officer. I don't remember her name, but we were involved. Obviously our art commission met last month, and it came up. So we're going to be there. History Forum's going to be there. A whole bunch of people are going to be there. So I don't know. It's 4 hours from 12 to 4. I think it's on the 14th on a Saturday, but I'm not sure the exact date. But Museum of Art History is sponsoring it. And it was 2 years ago, it was a big success. I mean, a lot of people attended it and they enjoyed it,
Well, we've been discussing in our meetings about trying to get more visibility to our commission.
Sure.
Do you know where the location is going to be?
It's going to be at the Museum of Art and History. I think
Okay.
I mean, if somebody has access, they can just Google it right now.
Okay, because previously you had it at Jade Street Park.
Yeah,
So
but
this
it's
makes
going to
it
be
more
at the museum
convenient.
this time. Yeah, sure.
And you said the person coordinating this was their
At the at MA.
development manager?
Yeah, she's got some title like that. They're no longer goofy titles, they're actual business titles, And I think it's $20, and they'll give you a table, and you can set up whatever you want,
Thank you.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
Joe, this is Carolyn. I just, and you were talking about where historic photos are available.
Yeah.
And there are places where if you're working on county buildings or houses that, that like the Capitola Museum has large collection of Capitola pictures, but also has
Okay.
SoCal photos. And the SoCal Pioneers has a whole collection, but
Oh.
it's not available to the public because it's just in storage. So if you want to see SoCal pictures, you have to go to the president of the SoCal Pioneers, and they can go and look for it. But a lot of those pictures are also at Capitola. So, and I know Watsonville PBHA has an enormous collection of photos. And
Well,
what I've found is often when you're looking through, if you go to the like PBHA, they have photos of other places, you know,
mhm.
somebody's collection. So you get pictures of Wright Station or, you know, Felton, you know, they could be any. So those places are interesting.
Well, I'll check with those people to see if I could just add that, check with your local historical society.
Yeah.
Or something, because they might not want people calling them up all the time.
Yeah.
You know, you got a picture of Joe Blow, you know? Yeah.
You get used to that.
Yeah. That's a good suggestion. Okay. All right. Anything else, guys?
I think I'm good. Anyone else?
Yeah. And listen, I understand, you know, when you, I don't know, some of you already done house histories and stuff, but, you know, you'll get in a bind at that courthouse, that recorder's office, and you can't figure something out. But, you know, whenever I've done that, I went back and retraced my steps and realized I made a mistake. What my only suggestion to you is you write everything down that you discover to keep the track on correct so that you don't forget about what you're doing. You write it down. Otherwise, where did I get that deed? I don't know. And you go back and look at the books again, you know. Not that you'd probably be doing that, but it's oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is you can probably get a title company to give you a chain of title for amount of cash. You know, they will charge you. So sometimes you can get them to give you just a run through. They won't tell you a lot other than the transaction and the buyer and the seller, but that's a shortcut if you wanted to you know, do your own place and spend a few $100s for it. Nothing's
That's
free.
good.
Yeah.
Anything else? Otherwise, otherwise, we'll adjourn the meeting, enjoy our special meeting.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
you're
very
welcome.
much.
It's
Joe,
fun.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, and suggest once again, you got any suggestions or questions or things that puzzle you, just let me know. I mean, I'm going to be updating this. I already have a couple of suggestions from the meeting, so it's dynamic. So thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Joe. That
you.
was just
Yeah, you're
so
welcome.
much great information. So
Appreciate
really
it very
Yeah.
much.
Okay, you're welcome.
We've learned
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Okay.
Yes. And I will see all of you a week from today.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.